Hi everybody, my name is Lindsay Brimmer and I serve as an AmeriCorps member with Conservation Nebraska. We are hosting this webinar about soil health with Nate Belcher tonight. If you've never heard of Conservation Nebraska before, just a little bit about us. Conservation Nebraska is a nonprofit organization that protects our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement. What I do as part of this organization is the education piece, which is what we are here doing tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Nate.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having me. And I guess I'll just start off by saying we can keep this as an open-ended webinar, if you will. I'm used to speaking in person and presenting that way, so this is kind of a new avenue for me. But I really think the best way is as we're going through things, if you guys have questions on any specifics, please chime in. I would love to answer those. We can focus more on that and ideally get you the most value out of kind of this presentation I've put together.
Yes, just feel free to use the Q&A feature in here as much as you'd like throughout the presentation, and me or Nate will stop and make sure your questions get addressed.
Perfect, sounds good. All right, I guess I'll start off. I'll give you a little just quick background of how I got into regenerative ag and kind of my journey and some mentors I've had. I guess just kind of starting off a little bit, originally got into sustainable farming methods, regenerative ag, whatever you want to call it, in 2007. I had a mentor in my life come into my life about that time, and he was really a leader in the regenerative ag movement before it was popular and really a hot topic like it is nowadays. And I'll never forget that the first garden we ever planted, he came in, he took a look at, we had dug up a whole backyard, just kind of doing it for fun, if you will, a little market garden stuff. And he looked at our rows and he said, "How can we plant it in straight rows?" And that's all he said. And that always stuck with me and really put it in my mind that things can look different than what you're used to. People, when you think of a garden, you think of a traditional till it up in the spring, plant your stuff in rows, till it back up in the fall, call it good till next year. So that was really the first exposure I had, really, of questioning the common practices you see in gardening and farming, and really look for those methods that give you the best yield with the best quality while increasing soil health. And so I'm going to focus a lot tonight on soil fertility and soil health, utilizing cover crops, different fertility management techniques, different fertilizers, because when we get our soils in balance and we have good available nutrients, we can grow really high quality food. And beyond just a nutritional standpoint, for nutritional density is obviously the main goal, but from a more simplified standpoint is just the flavor. When you have crops, whether that's tomatoes, onions, sweet potatoes, peppers, I don't care what it is, that are of high quality and high nutritional density, they're going to taste so much better. They're going to store much longer. And those plants are also going to be more resistant to pests and disease. So it's kind of a win-win. So the focus is on soil health simply because that's the means that gets us to really healthy, productive crops. So I call this turning sunlight into soil fertility, because that's really what's going on here. We are using cover crops and also our cash crops, which is a term that I use for anything that you're planning to harvest, whether that's to sell or not. We'll just call them cash crops. So we're using energy from the sun, having plants absorb that sunlight energy, and using soil biology to make minerals more available. So think of it in a circle. Sunshine is the input, and plants feed biology to make minerals available to the plants, and therefore the plants can feed the biology even more. And we'll get into this a little more in depth. So I'll get started here. I call it liquid sunshine, right? So this is photosynthesis in its simplest form. We're taking carbon dioxide from the air, we're combining that with water that the plants are uptaking from their roots, and we're turning that into sugar and oxygen. And those are really the basics of, plants' interaction with the sun and, making sugars, which is photosynthate. So when we talk about using plants to increase soil fertility, the reason that is happening is when a plant is very healthy, and this happens all the time anyway, but it happens to a higher degree in plants that are grown in mineral-rich soils that have moisture and the minerals and biology there. So that plant is exuding sugar or photosynthate through its root system while it's growing. And the reason it does that is that sugar, which carbon is a main component of it, is a feed source for the biology and the soil profile that then gives them energy to break down minerals that are currently unavailable to the plant and turning them into a plant available form. And so that's really that life cycle that we see in the soil, and why there's all this talk of biology and soil health and conservation is because when we have soils with robust microbial communities, we are making lots of nutrients available to those plants, which gives us increased plant production, increased quality, better plant resistance to disease and pests, as I had said earlier. The reason that's so important is, let me back up here. The reason that's so important is when we're getting our fertility, when a plant is getting its fertility from what we call microbial metabolites, that's really a fancy word for saying the minerals that those microbes are converting into a plant available form, that plant is being fed in what I like to call is just-in-time biological fertility. It's really just a fancy word for nutrients are being made available to those plants at just the right time in just the right quantity. Now you can compare that to the way, let's say, a farm or gardens are traditionally fertilized, which predominantly is dump a bunch of synthetic fertilizers that are readily available early in the spring when those crops are not really at a point where they need that much fertility, and hope that lasts us for the rest of the year. There's really a lot of problems that can come from that, and it's just not the way that nature intended for plants and soils to interact with one another. So I'm going to skip ahead real quick here, and I want to show you a video. When we talk about soil biology, this is what that looks like in action. So this is I believe a 200 magnification on a microscope I utilized, and what you're seeing here is biology converting, organic matter and humic substances as well as root exudates into plant available nutrients. So you could think of it this way. Let's say there's a root right over here, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you can, that is exuding sugar and giving these microbes a quick energy source that allows them to take this piece of organic matter and break it down and digest it, and turning that into soluble nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur and all these nutrients that plants need. And that's happening all the time in real time, 24/7, and they're doing it for free. So our job as gardeners and farmers is to create an environment through proper inputs, proper management, cover cropping, things like that, to increase biology. The more biology we have going, feeding in that soil system, the more nutrients that are available to our plants. And that's really the cornerstone behind all this. So let me see here. When we talk, so we deal a lot with cover crops. We own a seed company called Cover Crop Exchange, and we deal with a lot of cover crops, helping farmers increase soil health through utilizing cover crops. And we can look at that in two different ways. There's the biomass. So you can see here, this picture is cereal rye. There's going to be a lot of biomass left over when that's killed or chopped down to act as mulch to protect that soil. So we're conserving moisture, We're keeping the soil temperatures down through that mulch, but also all that biomass is going to be broken down by microbes and converted into nutrients, plant nutrients. But we can build soil health in two different ways. Biomass, which is the stuff above ground, and then root exudates, which I talked about earlier, is that plant pumping sugar into the soil profile. When we can maximize root exudates, that's where we get our really big gains in organic matter increases. So if you hear people talking about increasing their soil organic matter, the quickest way to do that is to maximize root exudates, which is that plant leaking sugar from its root system. How do we do that, you may be asking? By giving the plant all the minerals it needs so that it can photosynthesize in such an efficient way that it has extra sugar that it doesn't need to utilize to grow, that it can pump out of its root system to feed the microbes. So really, that's just a fancy, kind of a complex way of saying, pull a soil sample, add in what you need from a nutrient standpoint, and leave out what you don't need. Sounds oversimplified, but that is really a key in order to maximize root exudates. And we can even do this with the cash crop. So if you're growing sweet corn as a garden crop that you're going to harvest, if that corn plant is extremely healthy, you will actually increase soil organic matter while you are growing a cash crop. It doesn't just have to be a cover crop. So that's where this cash crop comes in. We can actually increase organic matter while we're growing a crop. I mean, that's just incredible, which is the way nature intended if we just set up the environment for that plant to be extremely efficient. And so the way I explain this to farmers and gardeners alike is, think of photosynthesis as an 8-lane highway. So each lane is a nutrient, we'll say, nitrogen, magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur, you name it. We want to make that highway as wide as we can by having all the nutrients in adequate amounts and in balance. So if we take 2 of those lanes away, let's say, not enough magnesium available to that plant, we are reducing the size of that photosynthesis pathway and slowing down plant growth. So your job as a gardener is to add those nutrients in that you need to facilitate that very efficient plant growth. The other way we do this is with cover crops. So in the off season, in Nebraska here, our growing season is, we don't have a full season right? We have winter time where things go dormant. If we can fill those dormant periods by having living roots in the ground as much as possible, utilizing cover crops, we are continually keeping that cycle going and feeding the biology at a time where maybe that field would be fallow. So let's say, here's an example, potatoes. You got potatoes growing in your garden, you may be harvesting those anytime in July, let's say, and that really leaves quite a season where maybe that area would otherwise sit fallow and just nothing growing in it. And so no sugars are being pumped into that system, where you could plant a cover crop immediately afterwards. So you keep that cycle going and keep the nutrient cycle flowing in the soil, so that when you come back and plant a cash crop or a vegetable crop, whatever it may be, the following spring, that soil's primed and ready to feed whatever plant you're going to put in there. And so that's why I'm sure you've heard a lot of talk of cover crops. They're very popular because they're extremely effective at increasing soil health. So again, I kind of touched on this, but that just-in-time biological manufacturing, basically utilizing microbes to quickly and efficiently feed our plant. And you can actually, this is maybe getting a little bit into the weeds, if you will, on the science side of it, but you can measure Brix levels. So if you want to test where you're at as far as a quality standpoint and photosynthesis level, you can actually measure the sugar content, or technically total carbohydrates, but we'll just call it sugar for simplicity's sake, in that plant at any given time. So it allows you then to do things such as I'll give an example. Last year I had a broccoli crop that was getting an infestation of cabbage loopers. I checked the Brix level of the leaves, and they were about a 10% sugar level in that leaf. We added a few foliar feedings of different nutrients, got that sugar content up to 12%, so a 12 Brix level, and the bugs can't digest that. Their digestive tract is not made for high sugar and complex carbohydrates. The bugs went away. The cabbage loopers could not digest the broccoli anymore, and they just went away. So that's where the important, if we can increase the sugar content of a plant, your disease and weed pressure, or disease and pest pressure, really starts going away and just becomes non-existent, because those pests, you want to move on to something that's easier for them to digest.
Hey, Nate, we have a question.
Yep.
Someone asked, as a gardener, how do we measure our soil?
That's a great question. So what I would recommend is every fall, ideally, and you can do this in the spring as well, I would pull a soil sample. So 0 to 6 inch depth, take a little shovel, dig a 6-inch hole, it can be very small, and then take a slice of that. And on a 100 square foot bed, I'm just going to use some rough numbers, I would say 2 to 3 samples per 100 square feet. You mix that all together, and then you'll take 1 cup of that mixture representing your whole garden plot and sending that into a lab. Here in Nebraska, I'm a big fan of Midwest Laboratories. They're local here in Nebraska. They're a nationwide or internationally renowned soil lab. And for anywhere from $26 to $65 per sample, depending on which test, you will have a complete analysis that tells you what is in that soil, and then also some recommendations for, what to add to correct those deficiencies. So Midwest Labs here in Omaha, I recommend their soil test that's called the Complete Soil Health. It's, I think they represented it I think it's just CSH, Complete Soil Health. If you call them, they'll walk you through the process. There's also a lab that I use quite a bit, called International Ag Labs up in Minnesota. They have very good soil testing lab, really good recommendations, but that is really the #1 place to start when you're looking to see what you need to add in. And the reason that's so important is you would be amazed, and I've gotten myself in trouble in my own gardens with this, is adding too much, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And compost is really the #1 offender of that, if you want to put it that way. Compost in and of itself, amazing for soil. It's amazing what an application of compost can do. But when you add too much in, you'll start to get buildup of certain nutrients, such as potassium, that can really get things out of whack. So you'll see there, under the soil testing, it says, add what is needed, do not add what is not. It seems ridiculously simple, but you would be amazed at how often an excess of something actually creates the deficiencies. And compost is one of those inputs, especially in an organic gardening scenario where that may be heavy applications of compost every year. You really want to test that soil and see if we need, things such as phosphorus and potassium. If we don't need those, then we use that compost in a compost extract or a compost tea, so that we're getting all the biology out of it and applying that in a liquid form, but without getting things out of balance, such as potassium. So I see, Lindsay, I see another question here.
Yeah, so they asked how to measure Brix, and will you go over products to add nutrients?
Yes, I will. A couple slides in here, I will go over what kind of soil amendments and products you can use. As far as how to measure Brix, that would be utilizing a refractometer. So if you go on Google, Amazon, if you just hop on your computer and type in refractometer, you'll have a lot come up, and basically all you're doing is, I'll use a broccoli as the example. You'll take that leaf or fruit depends on what you're measuring, and squeeze the juices out of it onto the refractometer, and then you'll hold that up to the sun, and it will show you. They're very easy to read, but it will give you a measurement of what the percentage of the sugar content is of that leaf or fruit, whatever you're measuring. And they are a very valuable tool to have on hand.
Okay, we got another one that just came in. It's a little long.
Yep.
So it says, we bought 30,000 ladybugs this year in the hopes of naturally keeping harmful pests away from the gardens. They arrived live and we saw them crawling around for a couple days after release. I have not seen any ladybugs for weeks. And then they go into speculation of what you think happened. Did they die? Did the birds eat them? Did they move on? Are they hiding? Etc.
Sure. So real quick, I see Rebecca had a question too on the refractometer.
Yes.
Great point. You can actually buy a refractometer at any local home brew shop. They're used in wine and beer production as well. So Patriot Homebrew out in Elkhorn, I know, carries them. There's also Fermenter Supply near 90th and J, I believe. Quick Google search will pull up those addresses. So as far as the ladybugs go, you're right on track. You're thinking the right way. And not from a financial standpoint, but I will say if you don't have any ladybugs around anymore, that's kind of a good sign. So the ladybugs in and of themselves, they're looking for aphids and things like that to eat. So if you don't have their food source around, such as an aphid infestation, they're going to go seek that elsewhere. So that's really where you get into this, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but kind of the chicken and the egg thing. So the best way to bring in beneficials is to have flowering plants around, but many beneficials such as ladybugs, they're really looking for those prey that they eat. So a lot of times what I see in my own garden, and this takes a little patience, is you'll see a pest problem come in. Let's say you have aphids. Those ladybugs will come in to start eating those aphids, and then they'll lay their eggs. Well, then you got about a 5 to 7 day window where those eggs are incubating, or whatever you want to call it, before they hatch. And then their larvae will eat the aphids, the ladybug larvae. They look like little alligators, kind of, if you will, if you haven't seen them before. And then that population will increase. So basically that's a long way of saying you kind of have to have the pests to have a large population of ladybugs. And being this early in the season, I'm going to guess that you maybe don't have that problem yet. And so those ladybugs go elsewhere looking for a food source. Hope that answers that a little bit for you. All righty, I will keep going here. So a couple things. How do we maximize biology? Living roots in the ground as often as possible. We want to minimize tillage as much as we can. I'm a big fan, and I practice no-till gardening myself whenever possible. It's amazing what that can do for your yields and water retention. So planting right into some cover crop residue, and I will show that later. And also chemicals. If you think of, I'll use Roundup as the example. It's a common herbicide, but most herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, they're chelators. And basically what that means is they're gonna, within a plant, Roundup is gonna go in and grab on to certain enzyme cofactors, basically things that plant needs to photosynthesize, and it will make those nutrients unavailable to the plant, and then the plant starves and dies. Same thing's happening in our soil. Continual applications of either herbicide or insecticide, you're actually locking up nutrients in your soil and making them unavailable. So anytime we can reduce or eliminate synthetic chemistry on our soils, you're going to be making steps ahead and getting towards a more balanced biological system. And again, that's, like I said before, nutrient balancing is key. Calcium, when people think nutrients, we immediately go to nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And those are important. But when we talk about raising nutrient-dense produce and crops, whether that's grain, fruits, vegetables, I don't care what it is, calcium is a key component to that quality and nutritional density. So making sure our soils have adequate calcium through lime, liquid calcium products, even some fish fertilizers have a lot of calcium in them, gypsum. Making sure that you have adequate calcium does wonders for crop health and nutritional density. And a soil test will help you indicate whether you need calcium or not. All right, let me move on to fertilizers here. So I'll answer these questions real quick. Lindsay, I can just read these off too. That's, okay. I got them here.
Awesome.
So someone had said, does a Brix level and soil nutrients act the same for a fruit tree? Absolutely. You know, kind of that, if you can keep your Brix level, and the Brix level in the fruit is going to change as that fruit matures. So as more sugars are being pumped in, fruits are ripening, you will see an increase in sugar content. But if you can keep the leaf Brix level above 12%, that fruit tree will be extremely productive and will be resistant to a lot of pests and disease. So, you know, fruit trees, vegetables, forages, grass, I don't care what it is, having an elevated Brix level is going to give you better growth and quality. And so Kara had said, what is an efficient way to get rid of weeds throughout the summer if we reduce the amount of tillage? Competition. So having a mulch on the soil surface at all times to reduce those weeds from germinating, just like you would mulch a flower bed with wood chips, and also cover crops. So if you've got a period of time where you are not actively growing a crop, put a cover crop in right away. And if you look at this picture right here, you know, part of that I'm seeding something, but the back half is a cover crop of oats and peas and things of that nature. As you can see, there's no weeds growing in there because they're being outcompeted. There's no room. If I were to leave that soil bare like that in the front part of the bed, I would immediately have weeds start coming in because nature always fills the voids. You don't see bare soil in nature unless there's something, you know, erosion or something going on environmentally, but nature always fills the void. So your job as a gardener is to fill that void with something that you can easily manage that is also increasing your soil health. And that's where cover crops really come into play. All righty, so for get back to fertilizers here. You know, we talk soil amendments. I'm really going to focus on kind of organic amendments, if you will. There is a place for synthetic fertilizers used in the right way, in the right quantities, and at the right time. But all in all, I'm a big fan of organic inputs for what they do for the soil health. They're feeding the plant and the soil, as well as their lack of toxicity. A lot of synthetic fertilizers have heavy metals and a lot of contaminants that obviously aren't listed that I personally like to keep out of my garden. So what I'd said before, calcium, you know, that's really a key nutrient that's not talked about a lot. Good sources of that would be lime. So if you have a lower pH soil, we can add lime as a source of calcium that also increases the soil pH. We're looking for a soil pH of around 6.8, 6.5 to 6.8 ideally. You may not be in that range, and that's okay. But if we're below that 6.5%, we'll use lime. If we have a little bit of a higher soil pH, let's say above 7, and we also need sulfur, that's where we'd use gypsum. It's calcium and sulfur combined. One thing I do recommend is stay away from Dolomite Lime. It's magnesium and calcium. You can get things out of whack. And all in all, I just recommend, if you need magnesium, utilize magnesium sulfate. We had a question here. How can we balance wanting a biodiverse garden of natural species while pulling weeds? Which invasive species are dangerous to natural Nebraska plants? You know, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be the best one to ask about that. I look at it more from a crop production standpoint than I do from just in my own gardening and working with farmers than things that can be invasive. There are some cover crops that do have the chance for hard seed that can ultimately become a weed if you let it. That'd be things such as hairy vetch, some other clovers that have a hard seed, and what that means is that seed's not going to germinate for a couple years. And so there is a little risk there, but in a garden setting, it's usually not a problem. So going down this list, if you do need calcium, we'll kind of run through this quick. I want to leave some time for more questions. If you can get some dry humates, mix that with the lime at about a 1 to 2% ratio, it can do wonders for that lime availability. Also, if you have a chicken coop or if you have access to any sort of turkey litter, chicken litter, anything like that, bird manure mixed with calcium, such as lime, can do amazing things. So if you have access or if you have your own chicken coop, mix that with your lime or gypsum and apply that together. It's incredible what that combination can do. Kind of going down the list, we'll just hit on the main nutrients. Phosphorus, from an organic standpoint, rock phosphate, soft rock phosphate, those are really the main amendments that I utilize when looking for phosphorus. Also, liquid hydrolyzed fish has a pretty good amount of phosphorus in it. The brands that I recommend, and I'm a distributor for on larger scale stuff, but you can find it locally, is Neptune's Harvest. Here in Omaha, I know they sell it at Mulhall's Nursery, Paradigm Gardens, and there are probably some others, but Neptune's Harvest, great liquid fish, provides phosphorus and a whole bunch of other nutrients. On the potassium side, if you need potassium, compost is your go-to. You know, that's like I said earlier, compost can get potassium out of whack if it's overused, but used in the right amounts when it's needed, great source of potassium, great source of phosphorus. Another good source is green sand. It's kind of a mined product that you spread. It's a dry spread product that works really well for potassium. And then trace minerals, you know, all the minerals that a plant needs in smaller quantities. There's lots of products, Azomite, Planters 2, Soil Mender. These are all brands, and basically what they are is rock powders. Some are volcanic rock powders, some are glacial, you know, basalt type rock powders, but it's a way to provide those trace minerals in small amounts that those plants really need to be extremely productive. So we had a question here.
Yeah, so we have a question asked, what is the typical ratio for compost?
If the way I look at compost is top dress. So if you have an established garden bed and you're wanting to add compost, I would add in a 1/2 inch, an inch maximum. That would really be on the heavy end, and just work that into the top 2 to 3 inches. You really don't want to work it down deeper in. And people that are starting new garden beds, I get a lot of questions about people building raised beds. What sort of ratio should I have for topsoil and compost? My recommendation there, because you can always add more in later, start by filling it all the way with just topsoil or just regular soil, and then add your compost in last. I really don't recommend 50-50 mixtures, depending on what the compost is, because you can get things out of balance really quick. And once they're added in, you can't take that back out. You can always add more back in, you can never take it out. So I would say, just to throw a rough estimate out there, if you were doing a mixture, I would say no more than 5% compost. Alrighty, so yep, trace minerals, again, there's lots out there. Paradigm Gardens is a good source here in Omaha. They carry a lot of those different amendments and whatnot, wealth of knowledge there. And also then, you know, liquid, sorry, I keep scrolling through here, guys. Soil drenches. So in-season fertilizers that you can put on as a liquid. There's liquid hydrolyzed fish, even a simple sugar water, compost teas. There's some seawater products out there that are a little unconventional, if you will, but they really provide a lot of micro and trace nutrients. And there's many brands that minimize the salt content, so you're not putting a lot of sodium out there. They remove the sodium, but maintain the minerals. Move on here. So now we're going to get into, unless if you guys got questions on fertilizer products and whatnot, just chime in. I'm happy to answer those. But we're going to move on to cover crops a little bit. So this is, you know, a big part of no-till gardening and having that. Quick question on the liquid fish. How do I know how much liquid fish to add and how frequently? Broad statement would be 1 to 2 ounces, or let's say 1 ounce of fish mixed with 1 gallon of water applied to 100 square feet once a week. So kind of a 1-1-1 ratio. 100 square feet, 1 ounce of fish once a week. You don't have to stick to that. Sometimes life happens and you can't fertilize once a week. In that case, I would say, you know, double it up every 2 weeks. But that gives you a good baseline. And then you can also use that as a foliar spray. So early morning or right before dusk, 1 ounce per gallon, and anywhere from 1 to 3 ounces per gallon of water, and you spray that right over the leaf surface. And it acts as a really good foliar fertilizer to give your plants a quick boost. When I'm doing that, I typically add in about, maybe a 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce of sugar, just simple sugar, cane sugar, dextrose, with the fish, because it really kickstarts that biology and reduces the time it takes for that fish to break down and become plant available, if that makes sense. Alrighty, so cover crops. This is, you know, when we talk about building soil health, cover crops are a key component of that. So if you're not familiar with cover crops, most people all just blow through that real quick. Basically, any plant we're utilizing to increase this, you know, fertility, tilth, nutrient availability, biology, all that in our soils. So it's really the way that nature builds soil, if you will. Just nature doesn't call it cover crops, we do. And the reason you're doing that is, again, you're feeding that biology in the soil through root exudates, and then you're also providing biomass on top of the soil to protect it, and then also break down over time and release those nutrients. So I look at it this way. We're using cover crops to grow a compost pile right in our growing bed. So you're growing up all this material. Traditionally, you would maybe cut that down and go compost it, you know, mix it up, browns and greens, and compost it. What we're doing here is leaving that residue right in the growing area to then break down over the growing season and make those nutrients available. So all this biomass, and I'll show you some more pictures as we go forward, that will be killed and laid on the soil as a mulch, will be, for the most part, completely gone in the fall. All that's been broken down, just like a compost pile starts big and ends up small as that stuff's broken down. Same happens with the cover crop residue. And kind of the key point of that is you are releasing nutrients in a very steady way throughout the entire growing season as that residue is being broken down. This works in gardens, works on 20,000 acre farms. It's really the way to dramatically increase soil health in a relatively short amount of time. You're also holding on to those nutrients. So these are cover crops planted in the off season that are holding on to nutrients so they don't leach at a time where maybe we don't have a cash crop growing there. What we plant and when we plant it is going to depend on what time of season. So, and what we're doing next year. So I'll give you a couple scenarios. If I have a bed of potatoes that again, I'm going to harvest in end of July, that gives me plenty of time to put a cover crop in that will winter kill. So when we get freezing temps in the fall, it'll kill off that cover crop, and then I don't have to manage it in the spring at all. That bed is ready for planting next spring. So in that case, I would go from potatoes to a winter kill cover crop, peas, oats, even some warm season grasses, sorghum Sudan. There's a lot of options that will then winter kill so that early in the spring, that bed is ready to plant. Actually, I'll show you some pictures right here. So here's winter kill. That was oats and peas planted in the fall. This is the following spring. That's ready to be planted into. So if I had any of my early season crops, broccolis, lettuces, radishes, all that, I would plant into this bed because it's ready early in the spring. To the right, if you're looking at your screen, this is a bed of overwintered hairy vetch and cereal rye. Doesn't look like much, but that was planted in the fall after, let's say, I pulled out a bed of peppers and tomatoes. Typically, I'll wait till the frost kills them. Doesn't leave me a lot of time in the fall to get a cover crop growing. You know, definitely not enough time to get enough growth before we get a killing frost. So I would plant winter hardy cover crops like cereal rye that will germinate late in the fall. You know, if you can work the soil, you can plant cereal rye, but then we'll come back in the spring and grow and capture nutrients and make nutrients more available. And in this area, that may be a bed that I'm going to plant sweet potatoes, you know, your squashes, anything that's going to be a later planted crop gives me enough time in the spring to let this cover crop go. So I'll give you a couple scenarios. I don't want to do all the cover crops too much because I want to leave some time for questions, but here's a scenario of what I do with a winter killed cover crop. So this was broccoli that I then harvested, pulled that out late summer. I planted a stand of oats and peas, and that's what you see in the top left corner. And what I'm doing here in the middle, so this is in the fall, this is about end of October, I'm planting garlic directly into that living cover crop of oats. You see in the middle, I've just got it's my really high-tech planting equipment. It's a stick that I picked up right next to me. I poke a hole in that cover crop. I drop a clove of garlic. And if you look at the picture on the right, that's what it looks like in the spring. So that's that garlic just popping through. I haven't done anything. That cover crop winter killed, my garlic's growing up through it, and I've got a nice mulch to protect that garlic and conserve moisture. And also all that residue is breaking down and feeding the garlic. Super simple. That'd be an example of a winter kill cover crop and you know, planting garlic into that as the example I'm showing there. So if you look at the overwintered, here's this, we'll go back to this bed. This little bit of green over here is the overwintering cover crop. And here's what we got in the spring. So it's really starting to take off. This is probably, end of April. That's right, it's really starting to grow. You don't see any weeds in there. We got peas, we got hairy veg, cereal rye, but no weeds that I don't want because they're being outcompeted. They just cannot compete with that much growth. Let me go forward here. So here's kind of what we're left with. We let that go. Here we are mid-May, getting ready to plant your sweet potatoes. Now what? So you got all this residue. I mean, I'm all of 5'6", 5'7" on a good day. And that cover crop's as tall, if not taller than I am. So what I'm doing here is showing an example of no-till planting into cover crop. So we have all this cereal rye, which is ready to be terminated. And I'm using this just bar to lay that cover crop over, and it will kill it if I do that at the right time. And then if you see this middle picture, we've just got a beautiful mulch here that we transplant right into. Move the mulch aside, dig a hole, drop your tomato in, drop your sweet potato in, drop your whatever you're planting, and you're done. And you've got all that mulch to hold the weeds back, conserve the moisture, release nutrients. And so the way we know when that's time, in this case, if we're talking no-till crimping, which is just laying that cover crop over, and in order to have it so it doesn't turn back up and keep growing, we need that to be at reproductive phase, which basically just means it's flowering. So here's a picture of those beds. This is cereal rye on the left. Those little yellow deals you see are the flowers of the cereal rye. And this is hairy vetch on the right that's in bloom, those purple flowers. That is the time when that cover crop is ready to be knocked over, and it'll kill it. And then you're just left with a nice mulch there. I got, Rebecca said, where did you get or how did you make that crimper? Again, super high-tech tool. We got a 2x4, a piece of angle iron on the bottom. Get it from Home Depot. It doesn't even have to be angle iron, but just a 90-degree piece of metal. On the bottom of this, it's a little piece of aluminum. Screw that to the bottom so that it doesn't have to be sharp. You're not looking to cut it. You're just looking to crimp that stem to stop the flow of nutrients through the plant, and it'll kill it. And then I just drill 2 holes on the side, 2 pieces of rope, so I can hold it, and I just hold the board against my foot tight with the rope, and I just move forward, push the cover crop over, step on the board. Works great. On a big scale, you know, we do this with big roller crimpers on tractors, but in the garden, a 2x4 with a piece of metal on the bottom, it's all the tool you need. But you will need to wait till you get to this time for that plant to be flowering, for that to be effective. The other way you could do it is just to chop it from the bottom, weed eater, scythe, whatever you got, and just lay that right on top. That'll work just as well, but the crimping I find is easy and it takes much less time and work. All right, I'm gonna zip through a couple of this pretty quick so that I can leave time for questions. I think we're
Another question just came in.
Okay.
What are good cover crops for raised beds?
Depends on what you're looking to do. So for raised beds, typically, compaction is not as much of an issue. So in that case, I would use cover crops that are going to increase the nitrogen content, so legumes, things like clovers, peas, vetches, anything that's in the legume family is going to make more nitrogen available for that in that soil. And then also, I do like some of the cereal grains to utilize that as a mulch. So I don't want to say this. The legumes, things like peas, vetch, it'll look like you have a lot of residue there, and that breaks down extremely fast. If you want lasting residue and really keep, have that soil be mulched, conserving moisture, you're going to want something with a higher carbon content, which is typically your grasses. Cereal rye, wheat, barley, triticale, those are all grasses that make for lasting residue. And then I like to mix those with the legume, like I just said, peas, vetches, clovers, things like that. So some quick combinations, I'll just rattle them off that I utilize quite often. Cereal rye and hairy vetch. If I want a winter-killed cover crops, oats and spring peas. If I have something midsummer, like a warm season cover crop, we're looking at sorghum Sudan grass, teff grass, Bercine clovers, cowpeas, things of that nature. And if you guys have any specific questions, the last slide I have on here is my contact info. Shoot me an email, give me a call. Any way you want to contact me, I'm more than happy to help on a kind of an individual basis based on what your garden looks like and what you plant. So don't hesitate to reach out if you got questions on that. All righty, I'll call this a little bit fluffy, but this is really close to my heart, and I think this is something we all have to be a part of this, right? The big picture. There's a lot of problems with our ag systems right now that need fixed. And the only way we can fix that, and I know I'm probably talking to a group of gardeners here, but You may not farm 1,000 acres, but you can support a farmer that farms 1,000 acres. And when we talk about huge environmental gains from sequestering carbon, reducing emissions, reducing our carbon footprint, reducing the toxin load that's being spread on a huge number of millions of acres, we as consumers have to support those farmers. So if that means getting with a local farmer that's a beef producer, that's grazing their cows, sequestering massive amounts of carbon from the atmosphere into the soil in a stable form, and you want to talk about climate mitigation, that answer lies in soil. We as consumers we have to back them up. Most of the time that means voting with our dollars. You've probably all heard this. But when you can support a local farmer, it almost always, usually does not cost you any more money, but we have to vote with our dollars. If we get ag right, if we get our ag systems to where they need to be, I am passionately confident that we're going to take care of climate, our health, our degrading health as a nation, which then comes into our healthcare system. Simple fixes make for huge solutions across a broad spectrum of issues. And I truly believe that answer lies in good agricultural systems. The only way that's going to happen on a big scale is if we, as consumers, do our part to back up those farmers that are implementing those practices. And then also growing your own garden, right? The best way to get nutritionally dense food into you and your family's mouth is by growing it yourself. And that's huge. I have young children. You can see here, this is my son on the right a couple of years ago, and then one of my partner's granddaughters. We have to teach them what good ag systems look like and how to be a part of that. If we leave them out of that conversation, we're going to be in a lot of trouble in 15 to 20 years, more than we are now. They are the key. And they learn from us. Looks like we've got a question here.
Looks like we have a few comments.
Yep.
So I will kind of read those off. Earlier, we had the retail commercial organic products have different mixtures. These will be very beneficial. Go ahead. Someone said, you're so right.
Thank you.
That Valerie did. Kathy says, Nate, thank you so much. This is so very interesting, a great presentation. Is this available recorded? I'll answer that. Yes, this is being recorded, and we will get it posted on, I believe, our website, maybe a YouTube channel. I'm not exactly sure, but these are getting recorded and will be posted at a later time.
Perfect.
And then I have buffalo grass, and when I mow it, there are lots of seeds on top. Will that sprout if I put it in my compost pile?
The short answer or best guess would be probably not. So if you're, I know with buffalo grass, you don't have to mow near as often. If that seed's not fully mature, it's probably not going to be viable. I could be wrong about that. But if you were willing to let that go, and let that seed mature and cure on the plant, it should germinate.
Awesome. And we have a thanks for all the good info.
And again, if you guys have questions, here's my contact info. There's my telephone, email. Pick up the phone, shoot an email over. We mainly work with farmers, but my passion is gardening. That's where my heart's at. If I could do that all day, that's what I would do. But we're on a mission to really take care of the acres that are out there and turn those around, because that's what we all need. But again, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help. Any gardening questions you have.
Yep, and we have a thank you. I will be in contact. I'm going to take this chance as questions have lulled a little bit. Everybody, please get your questions in. We'll stay a few more minutes, and as long as questions keep rolling in. So if you have any, now is a great time to still keep putting them in. Also, just so everybody's aware, at the very end of this webinar, whenever we end it, you will be given a link to go fill out a very quick survey. I think it's like 2 or 3 questions. Shouldn't take you longer than 2 minutes. So yeah, we have another question that just came in. I'll let you read that because there's a word in there that I don't want to mess up. Yes.
Yep, I think I have never done one myself. I have seen them. From what I've seen is start them early, plant into them later. You know, if you can start a hugelkultur bed, you know, with the digging all that stuff in and plant into it 2 years later, that's ideal. But it just depends on how you have it set up. But again, I'm not an expert in that, so I'll kind of leave it at that.
And in the chat, we have a lot of other thank yous, hope good presentation, etc., etc. So I said we'll give it just a couple more minutes to make sure everybody's questions gets answered. Again, while there's another kind of break in time, I want to take the chance to thank everybody here that joined. We have a lot of really great questions, and looks like another one just popped in. And I also want to thank Nate for a very wonderful presentation, as everybody has already been saying. So we had someone from Florida that said this was delightful. And then a question, how best should I use my backyard compost that I started last year?
I would still use it in your garden. Excuse me. So I look at, you know, I know I kind of said too much compost can be a bad thing. Really, when we get into trouble with compost applications is when we are bringing that in off the farm or from another source that's not coming from your backyard. So when you're composting your own residues from your own yard and garden, you're just recycling those nutrients. So we're not bringing in a whole bunch of new nutrients, we're just recycling. That apply it to your garden, apply it to your lawn, fruit trees. It'll work great in that scenario. It's just, you don't want to bring in a whole bunch from an outside source without a soil sample. So long story short, your own compost made from your own materials on your property, use it in your garden beds, and work it into the top 3 to 4 inches of soil.
Perfect. Let's see, we don't have any more. So in case one comes in as I'm saying this, Nate's info is up here. Please, as he mentioned, feel free to send him any other questions. You can also send us a message on our Facebook page at Conservation Nebraska, and someone can also get to you if for some reason you missed Nate's contact info and had a really important question. You can ask us and we can get you to him. So yeah. Again, thank you so much, Nate. It was a really great presentation. Thank you again to everybody that joined in. And one last reminder that you will be given a link for a survey. Please fill it out. It should not take very long. But thank you, everybody, for joining. You have any last comments, Nate? Oh, someone just came in.
Let me see. The question is, I've been trying to establish my lawn and other parts of my property with buffalo grass. I'm also trying to separate my garden into several parts of my yard. Now I'm growing beans in one part, corn in another, tomatoes in another, spreading out squash and flower beds. They are in the panhandle where the soil is extremely alkaline, so I have been fighting and trying to more acidify the soil. So I just talked about a bunch of organic products. This would be a time where some synthetic fertilizers can have their place. So the organic way to do that would be sulfur. You know, adding elemental sulfur, it's a dry amendment that you can put and work into the top 4 inches. That will reduce the pH It does take some time to break down, but that will happen. A quicker way to do it is a synthetic fertilizer called ammonium sulfate. It's, you know, nitrogen and sulfur basically, but that will acidify the soil. And let me give just a rough rate. Let me do some quick math here. You're talking about a 1/2 pound per 100 square feet of ammonium sulfate. Again, I'm not fans of the synthetic when if we don't need them, but that is a case where that's going to help drop that pH, bring things into more balance, and then you'll get more nutrients being released as your pH starts getting closer to that 7 mark.
There we go.
Alrighty.
And let's see, did they have a, yeah, so Ernest, in case you have more questions, because I feel, looks like people have dropped out, we're kind of nearing the end of this. So if we miss you, you always have his contact info. He said that he's added iron and sulfur and Epsom salts.
Those are all good fertilizers that can help with the lawn quite a bit. But again, without a soil test, it's hard. You know, I'd just be guessing if I told you what else to add. So that's where that, even on the lawn, pull a soil sample, you know, $25, and then you'll know exactly what you need, and you'll have the greenest lawn in the neighborhood.
Okay, awesome.
All righty. Well, if you guys got other questions, like I said, give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to help.
He said, thank you, this all helps. So looks like we came to an end now. All right, thanks again, Nate.
Yep, thanks, Lindsay. Thanks everyone for tuning in, appreciate it.